US Assistant Secretary of State for South and Central Asia, Alice Wells, has done a fine balancing act in her testimony before the House Foreign Affairs Committee on Capitol Hill. Now, here in India, we could take the position that what goes on in our country is not the business of Washington. We could also say that the Americans should first get their own house in order. After all, look at the turmoil within their country over their policy vis-a-vis immigrants. And this would be right, but it would also be impractical. After all, how the world's oldest democracy looks at the world's largest democracy matters in ways both tangible and intangible. Secondly, when India looks towards America among other global powers to contain Pakistan's patronage of terrorism, invariably we have to accept that there will be a certain prism through which the Americans will look at us as well, and we have to be ready to agree, disagree or counter that. To that extent, Pakistan would have hoped that this testimony would focus entirely or majorly on Kashmir. That in fact did not happen. This is a testimony that did focus on Kashmir but also called out Pakistan for not just its patronage of terrorism but also for its depleting record when it comes to both press freedom, civil society freedom and the way Pakistan treats its minorities. Other countries were also named, including Sri Lanka, Bangladesh and Nepal. Now let's talk about Kashmir. Here's the ironic fact. Alice Wells is an American, and despite the fact that we may bristle at her comments, her take is much more nuanced and much more balanced than the unidimensional perspectives that we've been reading and watching either in most of the domestic media here on Kashmir or in most of the Western media on Kashmir. Here are some of the simultaneous truths that Alice Wells recognizes. 1. Alice Wells recognizes that the decision to abrogate Article 370, that is to take away the special status of Jammu and Kashmir, it is India's own internal matter. In fact, she clearly says that India argued that this was to apply all national laws uniformly and all laws equally to both men and women, and the Americans back India on this. So for the Modi government, this is a victory. It is not being questioned on the decision per se to abrogate Article 370. But what is dragging India down in its international image is certainly the continued clampdown, both political and communications clampdown when it comes to the Kashmir Valley. In specific, the detention of politicians, including 3 former chief ministers, was specifically mentioned by Alice Wells, along with the fact that internet services and complete mobile phone services are still to be restored. India should be cognizant of the fact that this continued clampdown on political activity, on peaceful political activity, is not something that is going to earn us brownie points on the global stage and is not something that is helping us domestically either. Secondly, unlike much of the global media, which is not focused on this at all, Alice Wells has called out militancy and terrorism in the Kashmir Valley. She specifically says that while the Kashmiris have the right to a peaceful protest, terrorism has to be condemned. And to that extent, she's calling out both local and foreign militancy and Pakistan's patronage of groups like the LASHKAR and the JAISH. To this extent, I would go so far as to say that the media could take a cue both here in India and abroad from Alice Wells' acceptance of a complex truth in Jammu and Kashmir. On the one hand, Alice Wells very clearly says things are not normal in Jammu and Kashmir. They're a bit better, but they're not normal. This is a cue for that hyper-nationalist section of Indian television media that insists on a normalcy that doesn't exist. Simultaneously, by focusing on Pakistan's patronage of terrorism and recognizing that civilians in Kashmir are also threatened by militant groups, Alice Wells is focusing on a reality that much of the Western media and the international media has refused to focus on and has glossed over. For India, here's the lesson. India can take satisfaction, the government can take satisfaction that its decision per se on the abrogation is not something that the world is questioning. But this testimony is one more reason for India to now accept that with local elections, especially just around the corner in the Kashmir Valley, it is time, and it must be time, to lift the political curbs on peaceful political activity in Jammu and Kashmir.